Hi, I'm Gina, and today we're going to use some simple techniques to create a fun, whimsical artwork of some birds and a tree. And this is an example of kind of what we're going for. Ours will look a little bit different because I'm using a little bit different medium to create the lines. I'm going to use a fine point black Sharpie, so ours today will probably look a little better than this. We're going to start out by using a template. And this is a great way to transfer our image. So in order to do that, I'm just going to use a regular number 2 pencil. I'm going to turn my image over and add some graphite to the back. Very lightly. We don't need it to be too dark. We just want enough to be able to go ahead and transfer that image to the other paper in a way that I'll show you in just a moment. And this is nice because it kind of takes away some of the frustration of drawing the image on the paper. You are absolutely welcome to go ahead and draw the image if you'd like to change the shape and form of your characters. This is just a little trick that I like to use if we just want to draw the image as is. Okay, so I'm turning it over and I'm just going to quickly, with the sharp point of my pencil, go over the lines. I'm going to check to make sure it's actually transferring, and I see it very light, which is what I want. I don't want it too dark. And I'm going to go ahead and transfer these little birds over. I don't have to do every single detail. In fact, I'm not even going to put their feet on. I'll do those later. You feel free to do that if you'd like to. So beak, his wing. I might add some different details later. Just want to get those basic shapes. And this isn't as important with a simple little drawing like this, but you'll find if you're doing something that is a more detailed drawing, or that you want it to look just a certain way, this can become more important. And here's our little guy over here. Okay. So that's all I really need to do. I'm just going to give myself a sense of a horizon line down here once I get to that point. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and start with my bird right here. I'm going to take, and by the way, you can use any color you want. I'm going to start with my sky blue. And one technique that I like to do, I'm going to go ahead and outline him. And then I'm going to turn my pencil on its side, and I'm going to use the long edge to add some shading. You don't have to do this. You can use the point edge, but you'll find, I'm going to go ahead and color right over that wing because I'm going to use that. I'm going to add some detail to that later. But you will find that if you use the pointed tip of the pencil, it will be a little bit harder to avoid having those harsh pencil lines once you add the water. And then my next bird here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm choosing violet for that one. Again, I'm outlining it, just the basic shape. And then using that side of the pencil to shade him in. If you find that very difficult, you can go ahead and use the fine point. You just want to be a little bit careful not to press too hard and have those harsh pencil lines. And by the way, I'm using Crayola watercolor pencils. Different watercolor pencils, brands and whatnot will give you a different effect. Here's a yellow-green. I'm going to get this one here. And notice these are not intended to look like real birds. They're just little cartoons. But the idea with this lesson is to get an idea of how to apply the watercolor pencil and then also how it acts when you're applying water to it. Then when you go to do a more detailed or higher level drawing, you'll have an understanding of how the medium acts, because it really is different than just either watercolor or just pencil drawing. The next one I'm going to do, I think I'd like to do in magenta. Looking for my magenta pencil. Here it is. Go ahead ahead and outline him or her. And put my pencil on the side. This one, by the way, is going to be facing forward, so I'm going to stop myself here and go ahead and put my beak in. These are going to have a beak that shows on the side, but since this one's facing forward, his beak needs to be colored in first. Again, go ahead and use the pencil point if you find it easier in those smaller areas. Notice I'm not being too particular, because I know that I'm going to go over with water and blend this in. Okay, next I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and add our tree trunk. And so to do that, I'm going to go ahead and outline it first. I don't want it to be just one color, so I'm going to add some brown to this side. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. And that way when I go ahead and add my water, it's going to be not just all one color. I'm going to kind of pull the trunk up a little bit into it. And a little bit later, I'll show you how to add the foliage at the top. Okay, now I know that I have some yellow over here on this bird's tail. I'm just looking at my reference, just very loosely. I'm not being too particular about it. I like the yellow on his head. And I've got my tail for this bird. And it's okay to be a little bit loose and free with this. It doesn't have to be exact. While I have that orange in my hand, I'm going to go ahead and add the beaks to these birds. Got that one. And this one. And this one is looking up at the violet one. Okay. And then I have a flower here, and so I'm just going to go ahead and use my red. Might be a poppy or just a different kind of flower. And then I've got my foliage, my stem here, and my leaves. Not getting too detailed. Okay. So I'm ready to start adding my water and activating this paint. So one of the things I want to be careful of is adding too much water, because it always surprises me how little water I really need to activate the paint. What you'll find, let me give you a little demonstration here, is that if you add too much water, it becomes hard to control your paint. So if I just add a bunch of water on there, see I get a lot of puddling and it's going to go outside of the form. And that's great if you're just doing kind of a loose impressionistic and you don't have a specific object you're coloring, but it can be hard to control. So for painting like this, I'm going to dab my brush on the paper towel, and I'm going to just use enough water just to activate the paint, the pencil. In essence, it's turning it into paint. So what you see right now on my paper is actually the same as watercolor paint. Okay. One of the reasons that we like using watercolor pencils sometimes is it helps us control where that color goes, and we can actually do a drawing and then activate it. I go on to my violet bird. Notice I'm not being that careful even to stay within the lines, just activating the paint, blending it, spreading it out a little bit. I don't want to work it too much. And if you notice, I'm rinsing my brush in between, because once I get that paint going, once I activate it, I can easily transfer that color over to another area that I don't want that color to be. If I'm not careful with that, I'm going to end up with a muddy look. Now, that's a great technique if I want to do that. And sometimes we want to mix a color onto there, but this time I just want a solid color. Again, dabbing, and I'm going to come back in and do this tail. You'll notice that when I find that there's too much water on my brush, I go ahead and just dab it again. And I'm going to go back. I don't have to clean it because I was using the orange already. And I just need a very little bit of water. And by the way, if you have an area of your painting that you just want to leave as pencil, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, I forgot this little guy here. Again, getting some of that water out of my brush. And I'm being careful to paint around the beak. I'm going to add some detail, and I can draw that beak in, outline it with my pen later, so I'm not too worried about that. Let's go into the flower. Once I have a little bubble of water on there, that's really all I need to move that color around. And into my leaves. I could leave this stem and not even activate it with water because it's just a tiny little piece there. And then I'm going to go ahead to my tops of my bird here and the tail. Again, this is going to get detailed out. Rinsing my brush again, coming back into this tree trunk. You notice I keep getting that water off my brush when I find it's too much and I start losing control. And I don't need to do a lot here. Pull it up because I'm going to add my tree foliage in a moment. Okay. Now, it's important before I add any detailing here with my marker that I do want to let these dry. So while those are drying, I'm going to add my foliage to my tree. And I'll show you a trick for that, because if you're doing a tree or a sky or something that you want to be nicely blended, I find that it's best to blend your colors on a paper, then activate with water, and then paint. So let me show you what I mean by that. So the colors that I'm going to want for my tree are my greens. And in a sense, what I'm doing here, I'm creating a palette on this little piece of paper here. So you have, grab yourself an extra piece of watercolor paper. It's best to use watercolor paper. Copy paper would not be thick enough to hold the water. And I'm adding my deeper green, I'm adding my yellow green, I'm adding my orange. I'm pressing pretty hard. So if you think about, like, if you had a watercolor, regular watercolor paints in the pan, it would be similar, right? You would be using the water on your brush to grab the paint from the pan. That's pretty much what we're gonna do right here. Okay, so now I can go ahead and activate this paint, this pigment with my water. I'm gonna start with my lighter colors. And by the way, I do want to try and leave some white areas. So I'm just dabbing. The one thing we want to avoid is making it look too much just like a popsicle, or a lollipop, although our birds kind of look like lollipops, so I'm not too worried about it. It's not, the intention here is not to make it look like a perfect tree, but notice that I'm not making it perfectly round. I'm kind of, even more so than the one I did here. I felt like this one was just a little bit rounded, and I wanted to make it a little bit kind of more artistic. Now I'm going to go in with my orange, and I can, by any means, I can mix these colors right on here if I want to. And one of the things to think about is I don't really want to make it look like a pattern, like it's the perfectly exact same on each side. Coming in with my green. And in this case, I am using quite a bit of water on my brush. I kind of just want a nice suggestion of leaves. Notice I'm not painting individual leaves. And then I'll come in with that darker green, thinking it would be probably a little bit darker under here. And that's really it. I'm not going to do too much on that tree. I've done them before where I just put too much on the paper and then I didn't like it afterwards. So you feel free to have that any way that you like it if you want to add to it. Now comes the fun part. So this is dry enough now that I can go ahead and take my fine point Sharpie, and that's what I would suggest because it is going to be waterproof and very fine. And I can add whatever details I choose. Okay, so if you don't want to, you don't have to add any details at all. One thing I forgot to do before I do that is give these little birdies something to stand on. Okay, so I'm going to come up here. I don't want my birds to be floating. giving him kind of a horizon line. I'm gonna make a little bit more shadowing around that tree to kind of seed it in there so it doesn't look like it's floating around. Notice again, I'm using the side point of my pencil. I'm gonna add some green in here. Okay, and then I'm gonna come back and I'm just gonna blend that in. I don't wanna over blend, so I will rinse out in between quite a bit. I like having a variety of colors down there. And that's it. Okay, so that's gonna have to dry before I put their little feet in there. So I can start up here, adding some of these details. And this is what we call an ultra fine point Sharpie. So I'm gonna start by adding a wing to this bird and the eyes, 2 very small dots. I can outline the beak if I want, I don't have to. I could outline the body if I want, but I don't have to. Okay, so you can make this whatever you want it to be. Coming over to this one. Add that little wing. And over to this one. And this part really gets fun because you can just be creative. And you can make it your own. This little guy. If you like, you can add some little details like this to suggest that little top part of their feathers, I guess it would be. And you can add some different types of tails. They definitely don't need to be all the same. Let's get some eyes on this one. This one I do want to outline that beak in the front so that we can see it. And I want to suggest the wings here. Okay. As far as the tree, I can leave it as is, or feel free to outline that trunk. You can even add a few little lines that suggest wood or bark. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead with the legs and the feet. So just a simple line coming down. And 3 little lines indicating that foot, that web foot or claw. And then coming down from here. This guy is kind of bending a little bit to look at the flower. You can see it's a very simple project. And you can see that there's many things you can do. This wonderful drawings, detail them as you like with as much or as little as you want. Now, if you want to outline your birds, you can do that. And it kind of makes them pop, or you can just leave them as is. One thing we don't ever want to forget to do is sign our artwork. And that's basically the lesson for whimsical birds using watercolor pencils. Thank you for joining me.